Extreme disasters that changed America. Dust Bowl, the 1930s Black Blizzards, by Richard H. Levy. Extreme disasters that changed America. Dust Bowl, the 1930s Black Blizzards, by Richard H. Levy. Consultant Daniel H. Franick, Ph.D. This is the table of contents. Black Sunday, information can be found on page 4. Deadly Drifts, 6. The Dust Bowl, 8. Dangerous Farming, 10. Dry as Dust, 12. It Was Hot, 14. Not Just People, 16. The Dust Bowl Sweeps a Nation, 18. A Better Way, 20. Heading West, 22. Keep Out, 24. An End to a Beginning, 26. Just the Facts, 28. Glossary, page 30. Bibliography, 31. Read More, 31. Index, 32. About the author, 32. Black Sunday. April 14th, 1935 was a warm day in the Great Plains states. People were outside enjoying the sun and the bright sky. The day would have been perfect if the fields had not been so dry. Suddenly, a huge black cloud covered the sun. It moved faster than a car racing down the street. The cloud roared across the fields. It swallowed up birds too slow to fly out of its way. The cloud was a storm filled with dirt. It was a deadly black blizzard. The day turned dark and cold. Black Sunday had begun. This black blizzard hit Spearman, Texas on April 14th, 1935. On Black Sunday, the temperature fell 50 degrees in a few hours. The dust blocked the sun's heat and light. Deadly Drifts. Milt White and his family were in their house. It was dark. Milt held his hand up to his face. He couldn't see it until his fingers touched his nose. The winds pounded the house. Dust flew in through the cracks in the wall. Milt's father left footprints in the dust when he walked across the room. Outside, some people were trapped in their cars. The wind blew the dry soil off the ground. The soil piled up into large drifts. The dust was fine. People would not be able to breathe if they fell into a drift. Garden City, Kansas, just before a dust storm hits in 1935. Garden City, Kansas, during a dust storm in 1935. This picture was taken 15 minutes after the photo on page 6 was shot. Some people thought the end of the world was coming to an end. Singer Woody Guthrie even wrote a song called So Long, It's Been Good to Know You. The Dust Bowl. The next day, the land had been reshaped by the wind. A reporter thought the land looked like the Rose Bowl in California. He called it the Dust Bowl. The name stuck. The red states were the ones most often hit by the black blizzards. There had been many black blizzards in the 1930s, but many believe Black Sunday was the worst. The storms could cover whole towns with dust clouds. People felt like they were drowning in dust. They tied wet handkerchiefs over their faces so they could breathe. The dust still, however, got in their mouths and noses. It hurt their eyes. Many got sick and others died. These women hold handkerchiefs over their faces during a dust storm in Missouri in 1935. There were so many black blizzards between 1930 and 1939 that some people called the time the Dirty 30s. Dangerous Farming. What caused these dust storms? In the 1920s, many farmers had moved to the Great Plains. They pulled up the native grasses and cut down the trees to plant crops. The farmers didn't know that the grass roots were helping hold the soil in place. They didn't understand how much the trees slowed the wind from racing over the flat ground. Farmers also let their animals wander the land. They ate most of the plants. Soon the soil was loose. There was nothing to hold it down. In March 1935, 12 days straight of dust storms destroyed nearly half of the wheat crop in Kansas. The land in South Dakota was very dry in 1936. The Dust Bowl years. 1931, the weather starts to turn extra hot and dry from Texas to Canada. May 9th through the 11th, 1934, a black blizzard blows 350 million tons of dirt from the Great Plains east toward the Atlantic Ocean. April 14, 1935, Black Sunday hits Kansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. 1935, the U.S. government begins conservation programs. 1940, cooler weather and more rain return to the Great Plains. Dry as dust. In the 1930s, a long, dry period called a drought began in the Great Plains. The land looked like a desert. The streams dried up and the rivers got smaller. Wells were empty or full of dirt. In Fort Smith, Arkansas, a reporter was told people couldn't drink the water because it was dirty. It was making them sick when they brushed their teeth with it. A farm in Texas after a black blizzard. The loose dirt became even drier and very light. When farmers plowed the dusty fields, the winds picked up the loose dirt and carried it away. This dirt helped start the black blizzards. During the drought, dust storms destroyed more farms than a 400-mile-long, 300-mile-wide area. It was hot. The weather was also very hot during the mid-1930s. In many Dust Bowl states, daytime temperatures stayed above 100 degrees Fahrenheit for a month at a time. In North Dakota, a family stuffed their windows with towels and clothing to keep out the dust. The sun baked the people along with the land. There were no air conditioners back then. A few families had electricity to run fans. All the fans did, however, was stir the hot air. People couldn't even open their windows because the dust would blow inside. There also wasn't enough water for people to keep cool. In 1936, the earth in South Dakota was so dry that it cracked. In Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the average temperature in August was about 81 degrees Fahrenheit in 1936. It reached 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Not just people. Animals suffered too. The dust covered the cows' eyes. Their tears turned the dust to mud. When the mud dried, it sealed their eyes shut. Then they walked blindly into fences. They often died because they couldn't find any food or water. Cows trying to get water from a watering hole that is almost dry in Oklahoma in 1936. Certain insects did fine in the hot, dry weather. Billions of grasshoppers were hatched. They ate every blade of grass, including most of the wheat that the farmers had planted. When they were finished, people had very little to eat. Now people feared they might die because they didn't have enough food. During the Dust Bowl, many of the animals that would have eaten the grasshoppers died. They didn't have enough water or food. The Dust Bowl sweeps a nation. The number of black blizzards grew each year in the mid-1930s. Outside the Dust Bowl, however, nobody seemed to notice. The U.S. was in the Great Depression. Millions of people were out of work. Government leaders had lots to worry about. Besides, black blizzards happened far from the nation's capital. Then, from May 9th through the 11th, 1934, wild winds blew dirt from the Great Plains all the way to Washington, D.C. A newspaper reported that one cloud of dust was 1,500 miles long, 900 miles across, and 2 miles high. The cloud covered a large part of the nation. Now leaders paid attention. Washington, D.C. before the dust storm hit. In May 1934, even ships 300 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean were covered in dirt. A better way. A government official named Hugh Hammond Bennett knew that the dust storms were the result of bad farming practices. Bennett had been born in North Carolina. His father was a cotton planter. He understood farms and how to care for the soil. Hugh Hammond Bennett taught farm families better ways to take care of the land. Bennett sent workers to the Dust Bowl to teach the farmers better ways of plowing and planting. They told the farmers to plant trees to slow the wind. The workers gave the farmers seeds for special kinds of grass that didn't need much water. They also taught them how to save water. Hugh Hammond Bennett Wright discussing farming practices. The government paid farmers not to grow certain crops. They told farmers to grow grass until the dust problem was under control. Heading west. Some farmers stayed and changed to the new ways. They were proud people who hadn't meant to cause the dust problem. Milt White's family stayed and did well. Other people could not stay. They had no money. There was nothing to eat and no way for anyone to make a living. Between 1931 and 1939, more than 2.5 million farmers and their families packed up and left the Great Plains. They sold everything they owned. Many went to California where crops were still growing. They might still get farm work there. Many of the people who left the Dust Bowl were from Oklahoma. They became known as Okies. Keep out. Families piled into old cars or trucks and drove through the blazing heat. They camped by the road at night. When they reached California, the lucky ones got jobs on farms or in factories. The pay was low. They had to live without running water or electricity. They had to move around to find work. Few kids went to school. 80 Dust Bowl families lived in the auto camp in California. Soon, California was running out of room. In 1936, the Los Angeles Chief of Police sent officers to patrol California's borders with Arizona and Oregon. The unlucky families were turned away. A Dust Bowl family. Newspapers called the policemen who were turning people away at the borders the Bum Brigade. An end and a beginning. In 1939, the drought was over. Rain fell in the Dust Bowl. The country began to recover from the Great Depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt started programs to help people. Now there were ways to earn money and get food and clothes. In the Dust Bowl, trees and grass grew again. The soil stayed put. The wind slowed down. Farmers planted their crops using water-saving plans. There hasn't been a black blizzard since the 1930s. Today, the Great Plains supply most of the wheat and corn used in the United States. It's once again the nation's breadbasket. Healthy crops grow where there was once dust. The United States produced about 11.6 billion bushels of corn in 2004. Corn can be used to make fuel, clothing, and plastics. These are just some facts if you'd like to read them, and pause your video and read. This is the glossary where we can find the definition of some of the common words in the story. The bibliography shows where the information in this book came from, the sources. If you'd like to read more about the Dust Bowl, here are some more sources. And the last page is the index, which shows where you can find what page you can find certain information in this book. At the bottom we have the about the author. Richard H. Levy is a senior writer for Direct, a New York-based marketing magazine. Even though he makes his home in New York, he lives in fear of black blizzards. The end.